I'm here to talk to you about diversity in tech. And given the flood of people outside of the room, I can see where we all feel about that. Diversity can feel a little bit like an empty buzzword these days. It actually can feel like an insult in some concepts. I'm Christina. I'm the diverse speaker for you today on the lineup. But it actually has a huge impact on teams. So I want to talk to you about some recruiting and retention techniques that actually helps you get to where you want to be. There's a saying when it comes to diversity that you can be different from the majority in exactly one way and still be acceptable. The term I've coined for this is the adjacency theory, that graphed as a Venn diagram, as long as you're adjacent to the majority and only different in one particular dimension, you'll be okay. As a young, white, straight, cisgendered, Ivy League educated woman in tech, I have benefited disproportionately from this newfound interest in diversity. I have been given opportunities that women and men of color, queer women and men over the age of 40 who are differently abled and come from different socioeconomic backgrounds have not. Because I'm adjacent to the majority, except I'm a woman. Gender tends to be easier to address than race, so it's no surprise that companies are prioritizing gender when it comes to addressing their diversity problems. But women aren't a monolithic group, and intersectionality is more complicated than just gender identity or race. It includes socioeconomic background, military status, age, sexual orientation, and more. The business case for diversity, when it's real diversity and not just checking a box, is that an array of perspectives, expertise, and blind spots can lead to a stronger company and open up opportunities. And by building an inclusive workforce, you actually can access streams of untapped talent. A 2015 McKinsey study showed that companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity were 35% more likely to have financial returns above their industry medians. And companies in the top quartile for gender diversity were 15% more likely to outperform their industry medians. Point blank, diversity affects the bottom line. But beyond the direct financial implications, studies also show the long-tail benefit of sustained innovation by diverse teams. A 2014 study published by the Harvard Business Review noted that average teams and leaders, they tend to solve problems through compromise. But the collective genius of diverse teams actually led to creating diagonal solutions, like combining option A and option B even if they once seemed mutually exclusive. Because innovation happens at the intersection of ideas. Okay, so you've decided that you value diversity, the real kind, not just checking a box, and it's a priority for you. You've made sure it resonates throughout your business values, but you can't seem to get candidates hired. The first lens you can consider is whether you have a process problem or a pipeline problem. The most common excuse I've heard is that people want a diverse team, but they don't want to lower their bar on quality. And the candidates they're getting just don't stack up to the straight white male candidates that they end up hiring. Well, I've got two issues with that argument. Number one, they're assuming their process for hiring is unbiased. And number two, they're often falsely equating credentials with competencies. So let's break it down. A quick way to check if your process is biased is to take a look at the proportion of candidates that you're hiring versus the proportion that are applying for those positions. If the applicant pool for your engineering jobs are 10% people of color, but your tech team is 2%, you might have a process problem. If applicants for senior leadership are 35% women, but your exec team is 10% women, probably have a process problem. Determining where in the process your problem is might take a little more effort. Is your interview process structured to minimize bias of individual interviewers? Do you have your company values so clearly elucidated that when an interviewer reports back that a candidate is not a cultural fit, they can point out exactly which company value that the candidate doesn't demonstrate and why? And are your content interviews adaptable to a variety of ways of thinking? Or do they tend to favor extroverts who can think on their feet and under intense pressure? In short, do your hiring practices demonstrate that a variety of people from different styles of communications and different backgrounds are welcome in your company? Or are you seeking people based on gut reactions that remind you of yourself? Unconscious bias is more powerful than you might think. A new study out of the University of Colorado showed that merely having one minority candidate in a pool was not enough. They had statistically no chance at getting hired. But when they increased it to 2 candidates in a pool, it changed everything. A finalist pool with 2 female candidates increased the chances of a woman being hired by 79 times. And a pool with 2 minority candidates, people of color, increased the chances of hiring a person of color by 193 times. Control for unconscious bias in your process. The other process opportunity is to examine how you evaluate a candidate's competency. Traditionally, this is vetted through credentials, like degrees from a certain set of universities, or experience at a certain set of companies. And while this can be a useful shortcut when vetting hundreds of resumes, it's likely excluding candidates who have developed competency but outside the traditional pipeline. So here's a great example. I'm currently getting a master's in computer science at NYU. And in a traditional credentials-based application process, I wouldn't have been admitted because I don't have an undergraduate degree in computer science. But NYU allowed me to demonstrate competency in other ways, like through my math degree and my experience in tech. They also offered a 2-course accelerated sequence for me and students like me to get up to speed in concepts like algorithms and data structures and computer microarchitecture. And by offering multiple on-ramps, they have created a uniquely diverse class where students in the cohort that entered that 2-course accelerated sequence last fall were 50% women. And the majority of both genders were career switchers coming from outside of technology. So while you might not have the bandwidth or budget to invest in extensive professional development for new hires, if you consider taking a more creative approach to evaluating competency, you might get a bigger pool. Perhaps that Army veteran from the coding boot camp might actually be a great fit as a technical support engineer. Okay, so perhaps your new hires are pretty representative of the pool applying, but the pool isn't representative of the general population. Well, then you don't have a process problem, you have a pipeline problem. And there are 2 opportunities to address that problem. One is to examine what you're signaling to candidates through your language and your company branding. And 2 is to look at how you're sourcing those candidates. In 2013, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology published a study of the effects of gendered language on job postings. They noted that traditionally masculine language like competitive or dominant had a negative impact on the proportion of women who were willing to apply for those jobs. Not to mention more common tech terms like rock star and ninja and killer instinct. A great resource for feedback on your job postings is textio.com. It's a website that sort of functions like a spell check for gendered language. Project Include also has a handbook for managing bias, including language in job postings. Now, equally important, you have to take a hard look at your company website and note the team photos, the office decor, the description of your company values. If you're trying to showcase your company personality through photos of dudes playing video games, drinking around the office, and bragging about how they work hard, play hard, you're probably signaling to minorities that they're not going to be a cultural fit. And then there's simply the factor of where you source your candidates from in the first place. Sourcing through friends and professional networks probably will yield strong candidates, but they are likely to have similar education and professional experiences that you have. So think strategically about which communities and resources you might be able to get candidates through. And while you're at it, try to develop authentic relationships with these communities. Develop your own network outside of your usual recruits. Because if a CEO's job is to always be recruiting, ignoring entire demographics should probably be considered malpractice. Now, let's say you've managed to hire a diverse team. Congratulations. Now you have to figure out how to keep them. And retention starts with compensation. As Homebrew Ventures points out in their Diversity at Startups handbook, the bias you introduce or perpetuate at this stage in the process can have long-standing repercussions on the fairness of your team. First of all, negotiation is empirically biased against minorities. Women who negotiate their offers often suffer a reputation hit, that both male and female managers don't want to work with them after they've negotiated their offer. And secondly, offering compensation as an incremental adjustment to prior salary just perpetuates accumulated pay gaps. Instead, think about how you can develop preset levels and bands for both salary and equity, and use those to minimize subjectivity. And consider whether you want to make those transparent, like Buffer or Clef has. Your other retention issue around pay is going to be your diversity tax. This is the additional work that minorities are often expected to do around recruitment, mentoring, and outreach. How can you be sure that those contributions to the company are appropriately valued to including this diversity housekeeping? It's an easy analysis. When it comes time for reviews, bonuses, or promotions, do you focus solely on work output and billable hours? Or do you include these contributions to your company and value them in equal measure? To be sure, many employees actually do enjoy this outreach, especially if it means candidates like them can find a way to break through the hiring process. But if they take on the bulk of the work and aren't rewarded for it, they're probably not going to stay very long. Don't tax underrepresented groups unfairly. Back when I was fundraising for my first startup, Quincy Apparel, I got into a fight with my co-founder. We had just come out of investor meetings, and she was upset because she didn't feel like she had a chance to say anything in those meetings. She said that my style of communication, I jump headfirst into conversations, I talk at the speed of light, and I rarely come up for air. She said it didn't leave much space for her. She couldn't get a word in edgewise. She asked me to be more conscious about how much airtime I took up and to leave some room for her. She wasn't like me. She was never going to interrupt or talk over me, which is how my family operates. And if I valued what she had to say, then I needed to demonstrate that through my behavior. Now, at first, I was a little taken aback and actually kind of annoyed by this feedback. I mean, what if I left space for her and she didn't have anything to say? And why was it my job to shut up rather than her job to speak up? I mean, shouldn't she be like leaning in and all of that? To say it mildly, I didn't take kindly to this input. But over time, I actually realized that she was right. By asking her to adopt my style in order to be heard, I was telling her that I didn't value her, either what she had to say or how she said it. I was forcing her to become something other than herself in order to be included. Today we're talking about diversity, but the real conversation needs to be one of inclusion. This talk has been a work in progress for almost a year and has benefited from the ideas and input from an army of thought leaders. So take a picture of these resources and check them out later. And in the spirit of making space, the next time you're interested in discussing diversity and inclusion, I recommend paying one of these people to speak instead of me. Thank you.